Well, this is a game that doesn't need much build-up. First game back after the international break. Newcastle taking on Brighton Hove Albion here. Brighton sitting in 6th position, Newcastle 7th. Doesn't take much more of a sell. Newcastle really do need to, get the 3 points on the board. They want to be in that top 4 going into November. They know that that's the aim this season, to get in the Champions League. And Brighton are going to be one of the rivals, but it promises to be a really interesting game. This Brighton play such a high line. Newcastle have a bit of street sense about them now in the Premier League under Eddie Howe. They know what happened last season. They've played a little bit more. They've sat deep more this season. I wonder if today they're going to actually play possibly like the away team in some ways and sit back and invite Brighton and Hove Albion on. That's going to be an intriguing tactical battle between the two managers, Herzler and Howe, in the dugouts just below me. It's going to be a really interesting fixture today. So it's just building up here. Newcastle yesterday holding their press conference. Eddie Howe asked them a lot of questions about the England job. Was he interviewed? Was he approached? But now we know, with Thomas Tuchel in charge of England now, that Eddie Howe can focus completely on life here back at St James's Park. Going to be a really interesting one though today. As I say, Newcastle signed off for the international break with that sort of ball draw at Everton today. They'll be looking for the 3 points, and then if you review the 2 games in a row, 4 points from 6 from them, 2 Everton away and Brighton at home, that will be a good return going into what is going to be a tough run going into the sort of later period of autumn. I think for Eddie Howe, he just wants his players to go on a bit of a run, that pre-Christmas run, and get into contention. It didn't happen last year. They ended up finishing 7th. They were never really in contention for that top 4. This season they can build the foundations. No European distractions. Today a big one against Brighton. Well, a day of big expectation for Newcastle United has ended in bitter disappointment here for Eddie Howe. Newcastle today, it was all set up for them to get that win, try and get back in the top 4, and to be totally honest, it was the Brighton team that almost took Newcastle by surprise. Everyone expected Brighton to play this high line and pile everybody forward, but ultimately they were prepared to sit back and let Newcastle come on to them, and Newcastle created so many chances, but ultimately couldn't find that touch that would have mattered. It was really disappointing in some aspects, but I suppose Alexander Isak is not fully fit. He's been out with a toe injury, and that showed a little bit. But some of the opportunities Newcastle created, they should really be doing better. And the danger was they were going to get hit with a sucker punch. That's exactly what happened. Just a basic free kick, hoofed forward, and Danny Welbeck just taking a touch and calmly putting it past Pope to give Brighton a half-time lead. Second half, Newcastle tried everything. They put on £100 million worth of substitutes, but still no way past the goalkeeper. And I think really for Eddie Howe, this will be a bit of a wake-up call. They've scraped through some games and got a point here and there, but I think today was the performance wasn't perfect. They created enough to get something, but ultimately they've come away with absolutely nothing. Their first home defeat since January against Manchester City, but this game, even going into the 100th minute and Newcastle getting a free kick just on the edge of the area, they weren't able to convert, and they've been beaten here 1-0, and they've got to dust themselves down. Tough away game coming up at Chelsea, and as I say, a bit of a wake-up call for Newcastle here today. So evening falling on Newcastle after their first home defeat of the season, first home defeat since January, and Eddie Howe in his press conference, we've just been speaking to him there, he didn't have a problem with the overall performance, and you've got to give him the benefit of the doubt on that. It got to the stage of the game where Newcastle were simply all over Brighton. They were creating chances, but Brighton hit Newcastle on the sucker punch. And I think we all went into this game thinking that Newcastle would be playing against a team on a high line, with a high line, trying to, create and put pressure on. But the game was completely different to that. And I think, you've got to give credit to the Brighton manager, Herzler, for that. I think he thought, are we too predictable here? And I think he absorbed the pressure, and they hit Newcastle where it hurts ultimately, and Welbeck scoring the only goal of the game. Thoughts with him getting stretchered off with an injury. Hopefully he will be okay. He got a warm applause as he went off, but I think for Newcastle, the result disappointing, the performance not so disappointing, because I think really if Newcastle played like that earlier in the season, they'd have won games more comfortably. Eddie Howe making that point. I think the worrying factor for me is that they've gone nearly 6 hours now without scoring from open play. The reality is Newcastle can't rely on penalties and set pieces to win. They're going to have to start getting goals from open play. Isak has been injured. He's back now. He got his fair share of chances today. I think he had 7 goal attempts. I mean, normally a striker will get 2 or 3 clear-cut attempts and try to, take one of them, but ultimately he has just come back from that toe injury, and I think that was a factor today. But where were the other chances in and around Isak? Newcastle threw on £100 million worth of substitutes there today, and for me there wasn't enough of a response when it was called for. Again, Almiron coming back from international break, maybe that's a factor. He hasn't had too many opportunities of late, but Harvey Barnes has been the man this season at times, wasn't today unfortunately. Joe Willock getting the big opportunity that he's probably been knocking on the door and asking for, didn't have much impact in my opinion. So really these opportunities are going to get harder and harder if the substitutes don't deliver. And for Eddie Howe, he'll look at this now. He probably won't overreact, he never does. He wants to build up another unbeaten run at home. But I think for me, the game against Chelsea next week, it's not the sort of place you want to be going on the back of a bad result, but I think really he'll feel that the pressure is off a little bit because it's away at Chelsea, but he'll also be looking for that response. And then there can be no excuses the next game, the Carabao Cup against the same side, Chelsea coming up here. It's a real opportunity to progress to the quarterfinals. That's a competition that can keep Newcastle's season alive. They failed to get into the top 4 today, but while you're in cups, it can sometimes, paper over certain problems. But look, let's hope they can get through in the cup. But that response at Chelsea is now what Newcastle will be working on. Hasn't happened for them today. They've been beaten. They can't argue at the end of the day with the result. Maybe they can argue that they should have had a penalty in the first half. You'll see that on Match of the Day later. It looked like a clear handball to me, looking at the replay. But ultimately, they've been beaten here. The unbeaten run comes to an end, and Eddie Howe must go back to the drawing board.